Hello and welcome to season 3 of the NGO Whisperer Show. My name is Carolyne Opinde. I am the founder of the NGO Whisperer. We are a consulting business that provides technical support to nonprofits so they can successfully impact people's lives. Joining us today from Cape Town, South Africa is Dr. Tim Tucker. He is the CEO of Message Trust South Africa. Dr. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Caroline. Great to be with you.
It is an honor and a pleasure to have you today as we discuss grief and loss in the digital age. Indeed, Dr. Tim, with COVID-19 pandemic, the world as a whole is grieving. We have lost people due to COVID and other illnesses, accidents, and many other things. And what is so different about grief and loss that we are facing this time is we really cannot grieve together and support one another and comfort one another as we used to do. And so today, that natural process of grieving that we used to follow with people coming into your house, with people spending time weeks after weeks, after the dearly departed one has been buried and now you are just left in your home, people would flock in with food, with words of comfort, with encouragement, and sometimes even sit and just be available for you to cry on their shoulders and for you to just comfort them. But that's not possible now. So before we go into the details of this, I would like us to go through the stages of grieving, because you have written 2 books now, one based on your personal experience of going through grief and loss, losing your dear wife, and also one that you have written for the world to actually experience and to read and to learn from you. What are the different stages of grieving?
Thanks, Caroline. I mean, I think you're right. Firstly, to express that, this is been such a unique year, and I think we're all so aware of people going through grief, people going through loss. It can be the loss of a loved one, a relative, a close friend. People have also gone through a lot of grief and loss in terms of the loss of jobs or the loss of income, loss of security. So there's so much fear that we have. So I think, people are relating to this issue perhaps like never before in our lifetimes, perhaps in living memory. It's hard to think that we're all on the same page facing this issue. And in some ways, it's great that you're providing this platform to talk about it. I've appreciated being able to contribute to the NGO Whisperer magazine, and also, as you've mentioned, through my books, which are really drawn from my personal experience and trying to share something of I guess a roadmap of what it was like through my life and my experience of losing my wife just over four years ago. And there's a lot written about the stages of grief, the typical stages that people talk of, the 5 stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think those are the ones that have been largely spoken about for the past 30 or 40 years. But I'm sharing today as a co-griever, not as an expert. And I think it's important to make that distinction. I'm not here as a psychiatrist. I'm here as someone who has had to walk my own road, my own journey. I think that's the first thing that's important to make, is that even the people, I've read some of the articles around grief just recently, and even the people who've written those all acknowledge that grief is not a linear process. It's not a line where you have a beginning point and then you have an end point, and somehow, as long as you navigate through a few steps along the way, you'll get to that magic place called acceptance. And I think that actually can sound a bit cold and callous to those who are actually going through grief and realizing, wow, it's far more of a roller coaster than that grief is, and it's far more unique. So when I've written about my journey, this is the book, Grief and Grace, and I've written about my journey of grief and grace. What pains to stay is that this is not a formula. It's not an A to Z of coping with grief. Rather, it's a testimony. It's a story that can help bring courage and hope to others, to say that it may seem impossible to survive. At points, it felt for me like I'd been pushed off a cliff and I didn't know when I was going to hit the bottom. And yes, there were various stages that we go through, and some of those words I've given, we will experience those as we go, but it's not a linear experience. Rather, it comes and grows, comes and goes. So I talk about grief as like a sixth sense. We've got our five senses of touch and smell and hearing, etc., and typically they speak of those five senses. But when you've gone through deep grief, it's like all those other five senses are dulled. They become less, and you have one main sense. Is this sense called grief or loss, and it affects everything else. It actually affects the food that you taste. It affects the way the world looks. It affects the things that you listen to. And for me, navigating that sixth sense is what's important, because you've got to give. We need to be great. That's why it says grief and grace. We've got to be gracious to ourselves, to say that it is, some of what we go through is going to be unanticipated. It's unexpected. It's certainly uninvited. Nobody puts down the doormats and says, welcome grief, into our lives. It's often an interruption into our life. And COVID has been an interruption into many people's lives. Tens of millions of people around the world, hundreds of millions. It's been this interruption into our life. And so I think the first thing is just to acknowledge it, to acknowledge this sixth sense. For me, if we are going to talk about phases, it's getting to that point of saying, the stage of saying, yes, this is big, it's huge. We can't close the door on it. It's something we need to begin to work through. And that's why, again, I wrote the book, because it feels like a lot of people are so hesitant to speak about the grief and loss. So I think one of the things is just putting it out there in the open. I often say that 20 years ago in South Africa, when the HIV crisis was hitting, and there was a lot of stigma around people who are HIV positive. And so they addressed the stigma they actually printed T-shirts, and lots of people started wearing these T-shirts saying HIV positive, just as a way to open up conversation. So, and I think it had a great impact. And I think that's what we're trying to do with you and the NGO Whisperers, is to say, let's overcome some of the stigma about talking about grief and loss. Let's stop people having to feel they have to put on a brave face and reach that place of acceptance, but realize actually the depth of loss and the impact that has on us as human beings, that it is very real. And so we need to extend grace, we need to be kind, and we need to allow people to express themselves as they go through grief in the way that is appropriate for them. And I often say it's not about getting over grief, but it is about finding a way forward. It's about finding the next step through it. And even now, 4.5 years on from my wife's passing, there's days where the sixth sense suddenly feels real, and suddenly it feels heavy again. But most of the time, my life has returned, I'm continuing through, and there's hope and there's joy again. But at times, I'm still a man that is coming to terms with that loss. And I think that's important. And hopefully, saying there's not a formula hopefully gives people freedom to express and experience it in a way that is appropriate for them.
Thank you for sharing that with us. You have mentioned that as we approach grief, we need to approach it with grace and be graceful, I believe, to ourselves and to others. Now, looking at what's happening right now with all the social distancing that's associated with COVID-19 as a measure to protect each other, how has the grieving process changed for people? I can imagine, many people have, of course, I know it because I have experienced grief during this time. Friends have passed away in Kenya, in South Africa. Some of my clients lost their dear ones, and I couldn't be there for them. Let's discuss this, because I know there isn't a formula, as you said, but in your view, how different is this grieving process, including grieving because loss of businesses, because of the loss of source of income for many, and many other issues that may have caused people to grieve. For some people, even the fact that they can't go outside and be happy with their family and friends causes grief for them.
Absolutely right, Caroline. I think it's almost like the grief, there's a compound impact of the grief, because we can't express in community the way that we normally would. I think that the challenge of grief for a person that's grieving is that, you know, there's this dual challenge that sometimes when you're grieving, you do want to be alone with your grief, but at the same time, you recognize you need other people. That was my experience. But now we're at a point where actually sharing together in loss has not been possible. Social distance, having to self-isolate, quarantining has made it extremely painful, and it's multiplied the pain. And so I think it is a reality we need to be aware of, and you know, again, in that drive that many of us have to want to come through our grief, we've got to recognize actually that it's going to be harder, it is tougher. There's losses that we're not able to share in or experience in the same way with others that we would in more normal times. So again, acknowledging that is critically important, and caring for ourselves through this process is vital. We all know that the whole issue around our emotional well-being is huge, you know, at this time, and it's going to have a long-term impact upon even young people, this generation coming through, and we need to, as a society, there almost needs to be this corporate grace and kindness within society. I believe NGOs, churches, others have a huge role to play in this, to create an environment that says, you know, and this is a critical thing, I think, that we've got to recognize the capacity we used to operate at under normal circumstances. We may not be able to operate at that capacity for some time, and we need to be careful that we don't, in striving, you know, when the vaccines come, when life gets back to a more appearance of normal or familiarity, we actually still need to allow ourselves time to say, we've been through some ordeal, there's been trials here, and we can't immediately expect to go back to normal capacity, because otherwise what we might find is that we're not dealing with some of the pain and the hurt in appropriate ways. There needs to be that reaching out again, that relationship building, what does community look like, and how can we foster community to help one another come through the shared experiences, particularly the shared negative experiences that we've had. And I think this is where, you know, a strength of social media is, you know, a strength of the digital age, which is a kind of, I guess, the topic we're looking at in more detail now, and I've just written about for your next issue of NGO Whisperer, is that, you know, we could look at the digital age and say, oh, it's so shallow, it's so, you know, social media, it's so trivial, it celebrates the, you know, the kind of the fake part of life. But there's actually a reality where I think it has and is helping people connect and commemorate loved ones and lost ones during this time. Even in my own experience, even as I was preparing for this show, I went back actually onto my late wife Laura's Facebook memorial page and went back through some of the tributes that people wrote about her, and it was comforting. It was a helpful experience. Yes, it's sad, it brings back some sad memories, but it's also helpful because it shows that my lost loss was not just my loss alone. There's my wife, my late wife, had an impact upon many people. And I think that's where the social media space can help us connect with others, because we realize that we're sharing grief, we're sharing loss, that the people we're memorializing were real people who had real impact upon people's lives. So I think that's the strength of social media, is that it enables this sense of corporate loss. Yes, there's weaknesses, but I don't think I want to focus so much on those, on the weaknesses of it. I think for those of us going through this, we've got to look and say, well, how can we utilize the resources, this medium that's available to us? Firstly, you know, to commemorate ones that have passed on in a meaningful way, almost as part of now a rite of passage for us as we're going through grief. But also, how can we engage with a shared community in that space that makes it more meaningful? I know for myself, in the immediate aftermath of Laura's passing, I didn't post much on social media. I didn't use it as my kind of emotional hand-wringing exercise. It wasn't where I dumped all my emotional fatigue. But I did post strategically at times memories as they came to me that I thought might be helpful for other people that were going through grief. But actually what also helped me was when people shared their own testimonies and their own stories of Laura's life. And it did give me that connecting point. So I think the digital space can allow that. The social media, clearly, you know, the digital conferencing and so on, it can give us a space to reach out. But there are also other support groups, online support groups, and there's an online support group called Grief Share, which is an organization I point a lot of people to. And these platforms can help us process during this time. And I think those are important steps for anyone going through grief in this particular context.
You have mentioned something that I found very interesting, and I had to do this for myself actually, because when COVID hit, Facebook allowed people to set up their profiles and appoint someone to manage that profile page upon your demise.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that feature existed, and whether it existed before or not, because of COVID, I actually went there and I set up my husband as the manager of my page should anything happen to me. It is as if the digital world is preparing us to embrace death, because we know that at one point, all of us, we will pass on. No one is going to be here forever. At some point, I won't be here. And so it's almost preparing us to be able to position ourselves to the acceptance that this is something that is coming. Now, I will share this with you, Dr. Tim. In my culture, where I come from, you are not allowed to talk about your death if you are healthy and everything looks good. Oh, it is a taboo to talk about, oh, when I die, I want this. No, that is a talk left for the old and the frail and the sick, not for healthy people. However, with the digital world, yesterday, and this is so interesting because a good friend of mine in South Africa, I won't mention her name, she did her own obituary, and she said on Facebook, and this sounds so interesting because she said, when I die, I would like whoever is reading my eulogy to say this: I loved to work with children and I love dancing, and even though I'm not a good dancer, I love dancing and I am a happy person and I love to laugh and everything, and above all, I love to take care of children. She has early childhood development centers, and she wrote that. And she said, please, I don't want too many stories about all this and that, just say that. And coming from an African culture, she is also African. And I thought to myself, if this was 2 or 3 years ago, she would have been met with a lot of negativity and naysayers, and why are you talking about your death when you're healthy and this and that. But now my eyes are opening up to this new digital age where we are allowed to mourn publicly. You wrote in your article and you say death is becoming a much more public experience due in part to the introduction of technology. Then again, you say breaking of tragic news via social media seems to now be part of everyday life. I know that can be hard, especially if a family member did not know that their dear one passed away, and now people are saying, oh, sorry for the loss of this person. And you go through Facebook and all of a sudden you find out someone who was very close to you passed on. What advice do you have when it comes to breaking news that we have just had about the death of someone, especially if you didn't hear it on social media and you're taking it to social media?
Those are so many great points. I was actually going to, the first sentence you said there was a quote of another article I read as I was researching for my own article. And I had to say it again, death is becoming a much more public experience, was another quote that I saw. Death is becoming a much more public experience, which means there's no hiding anymore, is there? And I think that is a reality. It was always the taboo subject. But with it can be the negative, but it's also potentially a positive part of social media. So the negative side of it is that as we are, going through our news feed and on social media and everything we're seeing on Facebook, in the same browsing session, we skip from, far-flung friends who are celebrating getting married, far-flung friends who've just had a baby. And then the next one is someone that's, their life has fallen apart because they've lost a loved one. And then we scroll down and then there's an article about fake news. And it's like we're processing so much that we're not actually necessarily going into the gravity of the situation of a friend who's just the danger of it is it just becomes trivial again, that actually the public discussion around death and grief just becomes yet another thing that far-flung friends are going through, but we're not really processing properly. The other danger of it is actually with social media feeds, is that even in myself, I experienced this, is that you're just browsing again and you're reading someone else's story and it becomes a trigger again for your own grief. And so you've got to sometimes be careful and guard your heart, and know when you're feeling vulnerable and to what you expose. And I think so whereas these things are great tools and there's good things we can do to memorialize, and I think everything you've spoken about the public discussion around death, I think is a helpful thing, and as a Christian, I think it's a helpful thing to talk about these things and to have conversations about God and faith in the light of our mortality. But there is also a danger. There's the danger of trivializing it. There's a danger of hardening our hearts towards it. And there's also the danger, I think, as you're alluding to, of using it inappropriately. And I think we need to make absolutely clear that the family of a lost loved one should be the ultimate authority on what is shared about a loved one on social media, and sometimes that element is lost. In someone's grief, they post something and the family have not even had a chance to share with other family members about the loss. And I think that is where I just say, be careful, just think twice before you make the post. Do I have the right to make this announcement? I certainly have at times heard of the loss of someone on social media, and I thought, I'm sure the person who, the close family friend would have liked to let me know personally, rather than me hearing it through a third party. And so I think we just need to ask people to have some wisdom, and still there has to be sensitivity. Although it's a good thing in some ways that we're talking about it, that there are these opportunities to prepare people for death. I know that one of the things that was hardest for me with Laura is that because she died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, she was denied the opportunity to have her last words, to say things to people that she would have. And again, those of us who knew her well, we knew what she would have said, but actually to have those opportunities to provide is a good thing. I think the things you've spoken about are good things, but I think it comes with a caveat that it shouldn't be misused and misappropriated by people who are just trying to be the first to give the news, or want to get a head start, or for various motives utilize social media to share sad news. And I think that is my thing. I think there's two pieces of advice I have. One is if you're the person directly affected by grief, have a strategy with how you're going to use social media. If you're finding it's making you more sad to be on social media, then ask somebody else to check your feed and to let you know what people are saying and to share the tributes. Actually, some people did that for me. They compiled tributes and sent it to me. Actually, they printed Facebook tributes and sent it to me in a physical book. It was a beautiful thing. So I got the benefit of the social media without having to be the one actually going in, because emotionally I was finding it too difficult at that time. Have a strategy about how you share what you're going through. I think there's appropriate things to say on social media, but there's also things you should be saying to your close loved ones, or a trusted counselor, or someone who can help you professionally, that is maybe not appropriate to say on social media as well to the whole world. Set your settings as well. Think, is this something I just want to be out there in the world, or is it just private for my friends and family as well? So have a strategy as far as you can, and maybe have people help you develop that strategy. But then to people who are not the ones directly impacted by a loss or a grief, it's about sensitivity. It's about thinking twice before you make a comment or post something. It's about, saying, am I contributing to someone's healing, or might I actually be causing them more hurt in this process? And I think if we can have those couple of things, it does help us act more responsibly in this digital age around the area of grief.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now, as we look at support structures, I'm thinking about managers. I'm thinking about employers. What suggestions would you give to employers and managers on how to help their people handle grief, even as they social distance and work from home?
Again, I can only really speak from personal experience in terms of what is helpful. I think, again, it's hard. The job of a manager often is sometimes to try and box things and make it, fit neatly within the plans. But grief kind of explodes the box. Someone who's operated within a certain function and capacity, we can't necessarily expect them to quickly get back to that operating level and capacity. So again, this word grace, it's not often associated with management, but I think it's a great management style. Treat people as individuals, be gracious, be generous. It's a great way to foster loyalty. I was given, immediately, I was given 4 months compassionate leave by the board. I'm the CEO of the organization, and the board said to me, there's certain things you need to be able to put in place over the next few months. And so we're going to allow you to do that. And exponentially increased my loyalty to the organization and my board because of their generosity to me at that time. And even when I came back, I was allowed over the first few months, if I needed to take a day just for reflection and for healing, those things that happened. I think that's kind of the environment, speaks into the environment. I think it's not always the best thing to tell people don't work. I think actually sometimes time for people going through grief, time can go really slowly, and if there's no productive activity, that can actually be a harmful thing. So again, don't necessarily think, I actually had during that 4 months, I had a lot to sort out. You know, I was a single dad now with 3 kids. My wife had homeschooled the kids. I needed to completely sort out their future. There was a whole lot of practical stuff that I threw myself into. I needed to keep busy. It wasn't that I sat around doing nothing, but it was appropriate busyness according to the stage of life that I was in and the grief that I was going through. So I think that's, as far as possible, appropriate interaction. I think as managers and leaders, we need to be able to know where we can refer people for professional help. So if you're a small organization, sometimes this is difficult because we don't have the human resource. If you're an NGO, we often don't have the human resource management internally for these things. But I think every director should be able to know where we can refer people to for professional support and professional help. As I've said, I've referred a lot to Grief Share organization. But there are others out there that are specialists, and it's an appropriate time to have specialist help. We've referred people to psychologists along the way as well, people that can really help people with the holistic approach as well. So I think those are the things: kind, generous, gracious. Treat people again as individuals, but know where you can also refer people for support. And I think finally, communication. Communicating with the broader staff body. We know loss and grief is a part of life. It's a part of any organization. At any time, someone on our team might go through this thing. So when it hits, communicate, offer that, let people on the team know what's going on, with appropriate messaging. For us as the message and our team here, WhatsApp has been great, just as our staff WhatsApp group, for people to be able to share, okay, so-and-so's got COVID, can we pray for them as a team? I've got someone going through this difficult circumstance, and it fosters that sense of mutual support. So again, as leaders, try and allow that environment to be part of your organizational culture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tim. It is such an honor to have you today. Ladies and gentlemen, there are online websites that you can go to, online communities that you can go to, and one of them that Dr. Tim has shared with us is grieveshare.org. You can go there and be part of this community and just get the support that you need. We really appreciate you taking time to come here and share with us our topic today, grief and loss in the digital age. Dr. Tim, let people know about the 2 books that you've written on this topic and where they can find it.
Thanks so much. Yes, so my first book, which really highlights my journey, my story in the 6 months after the loss of Laura, is Grief and Grace. Facing the Future I Didn't Choose, and this is on Amazon, or if you go to the message.org.za website and go to the resources section, there's information there on how to get hold of it. Yeah, there's various ways and outlets that you can order it from. It's on Kindle, which is obviously a great way. But then the book I wrote was an adaptation of the lessons I learned through my experience of grief, specifically for the COVID-19 reality. And that actually then, I just changed the wording to Facing the Future We Didn't Choose. Facing the Future We Didn't Choose. Finding Courage and Hope in COVID-19. And that's actually a free ebook. It is on Kindle, it's on other bookstores, it's downloadable as a PDF as well. But I'll give you another website. So my personal blog site is grabatowel.site, and there's a list of all my books and resources is available on there as well, including to be able to download Facing the Future We Didn't Choose.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this article, Grief and Loss in the Digital Age, will also be published in issue number 8 of the NGO Whisperer magazine that is coming out just before Christmas. It's our special edition this year. We thank you so much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as go to grabatowel.site to read more about the blogs that Dr. Tim often posts there. Remember, it's all about connecting people, raising funds, and impacting lives.